Everyone thought the dog had gone mad, barking non-stop, splashing into the river, and dragging something toward the shore. But when the locals got close enough to see what he was trying to save, they froze. One man even dropped to his knees. K-9 officers are trained to protect and serve. They sniff out danger, chase down criminals, and sometimes they do things no one can explain. This story isn't just about a brave German shepherd. It's about the moment a whole town was shaken to its core because of what this dog pulled out of the water. Officer Mark Holloway had always said there were two things you couldn't teach a dog: heart and instinct. Everything else, obedience, discipline, protection, even tracking, could be trained. But the gut feeling, that sixth sense, that came from somewhere deeper. Diesel, his K-9 partner for over 6 years, had it. Diesel wasn't just another German shepherd in a vest. He was a force of nature, alert, focused, intensely loyal. In the years they'd served together, Mark had seen Diesel do things that defied logic, like the time he found a missing child under a collapsed shed when the cadaver dogs had given up, or when he leapt through a window to protect a hostage during a standoff. Diesel had that something, the kind of awareness that made Mark trust his partner even more than most humans. But nothing they'd experienced together, not the arrests, not the shootouts, not the praise, came close to what happened on that quiet Tuesday in mid-April. It was supposed to be a routine day, the kind of shift every officer hopes for. No calls, no sirens, no adrenaline, just a patrol on foot through the south end of town, near the old Riverside Trail that wound alongside a shallow stretch of the Birch River. The sun was warm, spring had fully arrived, and the air smelled like cut grass and thawed earth. A few locals were out, jogging or walking their dogs, nodding politely as Mark and Diesel passed. Nothing seemed out of place, except Diesel. At first, it was subtle. He slowed down, his head turned slightly more than usual, nose angled toward the breeze drifting up from the water. His ears pricked, then flattened, then lifted again. Mark noticed, but chalked it up to the sense of wildlife. A squirrel, maybe, or raccoons nesting by the river. But then Diesel let out a low growl. Mark's hand tightened on the leash. Diesel didn't growl without reason. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't excitement. It was a rumble, deep in his throat, the kind that vibrated up through his chest. A warning. "What is it, boy?" Mark murmured, slowing his steps. Diesel didn't answer, not in words, but in behavior. His entire body went tense, his tail lowered, muscles rippling beneath his short tan coat. His eyes were locked on something, but Mark couldn't see what. Just the shimmer of sunlight on water, broken by gentle ripples. Mark followed his gaze. The river looked peaceful, serene, too shallow to be dangerous. It flowed softly along its rocky bed, winding past banks lined with reeds and the occasional fallen tree limb. There was nothing there. Then Diesel barked. Once, sharp, urgent. Before Mark could react, Diesel yanked the leash hard, so hard it slipped through Mark's gloved hand, and bolted toward the riverbank. "Diesel, heel!" Mark shouted, already running after him. But Diesel didn't stop. He never did that. He never broke protocol like that. Mark's heart started pounding, not from the run, but from the dread rising in his chest. Something was wrong. Something was really wrong. Diesel reached the river's edge, paused just long enough to look down, then started barking again. Rapid, panic barks that echoed off the nearby trees. Not the aggressive bark of a chase, not the warning bark he used on suspects. This was something else. It was fear, desperation. Mark reached the bank, breathing hard, and looked where Diesel was staring. For a second, he still didn't see it. The water was reflective, broken by small waves. Then, something caught the light. Something dark, tangled in the current, half submerged and floating slowly downstream. A backpack. No, too soft, too shapeless. Clothing. No, it looked bundled. Fabric wrapped around something else. The water wasn't deep, but the current was faster than it looked. And Diesel wasn't waiting for answers. With a final bark, he leapt in. As Diesel plunged into the river, a few people nearby turned to watch. A jogger slowed down. A man with a fishing pole paused on the opposite bank, shading his eyes. Mark hesitated only a second, then ran down the slope of the muddy riverbank. He didn't call for Diesel this time. He knew it was pointless. Diesel was locked in. Whatever he had seen, whatever his instincts were screaming at him, he wasn't letting go. The shepherd swam hard, muscles slicing through the water as he paddled toward the dark shape. The river tugged at him, but Diesel powered through, closing the distance quickly. Then he reached it. He clamped his jaws around the object gently and began turning, dragging it back toward the shore. That's when Mark's got twisted, because now he could see it more clearly. It wasn't trash. It wasn't an animal. It was a soaked blanket, wrapped around something, and it wasn't empty. The blanket was heavy, waterlogged, dragging in the current like an anchor. Diesel's jaws were firm but careful, and even through the tension in his limbs, Mark could see it. His partner was being gentle, deliberate. It wasn't a toy or a training dummy. It was something alive, or had been, by now. A few people had stopped along the path above them, watching from the wooden railing that overlooked the riverbank. Mark could hear their voices behind him. Is that a dog in the water? What's he bringing? Wait, is that a person? Mark didn't respond. He was knee-deep in the shallows, waiting for Diesel to get close enough. The dog was paddling hard, fighting the pull of the water as he dragged the bundle closer, inch by inch. Come on, buddy, Mark whispered, stretching out a hand. Diesel gave one final surge and pushed forward until his paws hit gravel. With a grunt, Mark grabbed the edge of the blanket, pulling it the rest of the way up the slippery riverbank. It landed on the rocks with a wet, sickening thump. The shape inside didn't move. Mark fell to his knees. The blanket was old, faded pink and blue, with a cartoonish pattern that had long since worn off. It was wrapped tightly around something small, smaller than he expected. His fingers trembled as he reached for the edges. For a second, he couldn't bring himself to look. His brain was trying to protect him from whatever truth lay hidden inside. But instinct took over. He peeled the fabric back slowly, inch by inch, and then everything stopped. Inside the blanket was a child, a little girl, no older than 3, maybe 4. Her hair was dark, soaked flat against her pale forehead. Her arms were curled tightly to her chest, and her lips were slightly parted. She wasn't moving. Mark's world narrowed to a single point. A million thoughts tried to rush in all at once. How did she get here? Where are her parents? Is she breathing? But they were all silenced by one terrifying possibility. She might already be gone. Mark dropped to his knees beside her. Call 911, he yelled over his shoulder. Now, he placed 2 fingers gently on her neck, just below the jawline, pressing in. Nothing. No. Wait. There. Faint. Barely there. But something. A pulse. She's alive. Mark gasped. She's got a pulse. The crowd above erupted in murmurs. Someone sobbed. Another voice yelled. An ambulance is on the way. Diesel stood beside Mark, drenched and panting, his eyes locked on the little girl. He didn't wag his tail, didn't bark. He just stood there like a sentinel, frozen in place, watching over her with the intensity of a soldier guarding a fallen comrade. Mark didn't know what to do first. CPR? Recovery position? He had some medical training, but the water complicated everything. She could have inhaled river water. She could have hypothermia. She could. The girl coughed. It was small, wet, barely audible, but it was enough. Mark turned her gently to her side as water spilled from her mouth. She coughed again, and again. Her tiny chest began to rise and fall. He exhaled for the first time, in what felt like hours. She's breathing, he whispered. The sirens echoed in the distance a moment later, faint at first, then growing louder. Red and blue lights flickered between the trees as the ambulance pulled up near the trailhead. Paramedics jumped out with gear in hand, following the trail of onlookers down to the river's edge. Mark stepped back as they took over, watching as they wrapped the girl in dry blankets, checked her vitals, inserted an oxygen tube. She was still unconscious, but her breathing was steady now. One of the paramedics looked up. You pulled her out? Mark shook his head, gesturing to Diesel. He did. The medic stared at the dripping German shepherd, then gave a small nod of respect. Damn good dog. Diesel didn't react. He was still watching the girl, his eyes locked on her face, as if willing her to stay alive. Mark placed a hand on his partner's wet neck. You saw her when no one else did, huh, boy? Diesel leaned into his touch, but only slightly. His job wasn't done. They lifted the little girl onto a stretcher and began the short walk back to the ambulance. Mark followed, Diesel trotting silently beside him. It wasn't until they were loading her into the back that one of the paramedics asked, "Do we know who she is?" Mark opened his mouth and then stopped. No one knew. No one had seen where she came from. No adults had screamed. No cries for help. She wasn't reported missing, at least not yet. She had just been there, hidden in the blanket, floating downstream in a quiet river on a sleepy afternoon. Nothing, Mark said slowly. No ID. No one's come forward. The medic's brow furrowed. So where did she come from? Mark looked back at the water. It was calm again, peaceful, as if nothing had happened. But something had, something unthinkable. And the fact that no one had noticed until Diesel did sent a chill down Mark's spine. The little girl was taken to St. Mercy Hospital, the best the small town had to offer. Her vitals stabilized. She was alive, breathing, recovering, but no one knew her name, and even stranger, No one came looking. Mark expected a flurry of calls. A missing child was every parent's worst nightmare. Surely, somewhere, someone was panicking, but the town's dispatch board stayed silent. No reports, no alerts, nothing on the state registry either. Hours turned into a full day. The girl remained unconscious, and still no one came. It didn't make sense. A child that age didn't just end up alone in a river by accident. Someone had to be responsible. Someone had to know she was missing. Mark couldn't shake it. He paced the hospital hallway while Diesel lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, but ears flicking at every passing nurse. The scene kept replaying in Mark's mind. Diesel yanking the leash, sprinting toward the water, barking at the current. The urgency, the precision. Diesel hadn't hesitated for even a second. He knew. And now, Mark wanted to know too. The next morning, Mark filed an official report and started digging. First, the obvious questions. Was there a nearby home where the girl could have come from? Any witnesses upstream? Homeless camps? Foster families? He walked the banks of the river, starting from the exact spot where Diesel had first barked. The area was wooded but familiar. Trails weaved along the edge, and a few old fishing docks jutted into the water. But the river was long. It ran over 40 miles before hitting the next county. Mark followed it upstream. After 2 hours, he found something. Not much, but enough to make his pulse rise. About a mile upriver, wedged between two fallen logs, he spotted a torn piece of the same cartoon blanket the girl had been wrapped in. It was faded and snagged, fluttering slightly in the water like a flag. Mark pulled it free and examined the pattern. Dinosaurs, pink and green, exactly like the one Diesel had dragged ashore. The child had floated down from here. So what happened upstream? Mark widened his search. He spoke with residents who lived near the river. A retired couple remembered hearing a dog barking like mad around the same time Diesel had bolted, but they thought it was just coyotes. A kayaker reported seeing something odd floating in the current, but thought it was debris. So many people had almost seen her, but no one really had. That's when Mark started checking the vacant cabins. There were 3 old fishing lodges that lined the far side of the river, rarely used except during tourist season. 2 were completely empty. One was locked, boarded up, and covered in ivy. The third was different. It wasn't locked. The door creaked open under Mark's hand. Dust danced in the sunlight pouring through a cracked window. The place smelled like damp wood and mildew. Empty beer cans littered the floor. A couple of old sleeping bags were rolled up in the corner. It looked abandoned, but only recently. Mark's eyes scanned the room. Then he saw it. In the corner, beside a broken chair, was a small pink shoe. It was soaked and muddy, but unmistakably a child's. Next to it, buried under a crumpled blanket, was a stuffed animal, some kind of plush elephant. It had been chewed at the ear, and one button eye was missing, but it was unmistakably well loved. Mark crouched down and picked it up gently. His heart sank. Whoever had been here had left in a hurry, and they had left her behind. Back at the hospital, the girl still hadn't woken up. The doctor said she was stable, but unresponsive. It wasn't a coma exactly, more like shock. She's holding on, the nurse told Mark softly, but it's like her body's waiting for her mind to catch up. Mark sat in the chair by her bedside, holding the stuffed elephant in his lap. "Who are you, little one?" he whispered. Diesel sat by the door, watching again, always watching. Then something strange happened. Diesel stood up, his ears perked. He turned toward the hospital hallway and growled. Mark's spine went rigid. "What is it, boy?" Diesel didn't move from the door. He was staring down the hall like he was seeing something, or someone, that shouldn't be there. Mark stepped outside, but the hallway was empty. Still, Diesel kept growling. Something about it chilled Mark more than anything else. His partner had spent years in dangerous situations, high-stakes busts, chases, violent criminals, and he rarely growled without cause. But this wasn't a bark of warning. This was low, personal, defensive. Mark crouched beside him. "You know something's not right, don't you?" Diesel looked up at him with those deep, unreadable eyes. And that's when Mark knew. Whatever had happened to that little girl wasn't just a case of abandonment. Something darker had happened in that cabin. And whatever it was that wasn't over. 2 days after Diesel pulled her from the river, the little girl finally stirred. It was just a flicker at first. Her hand twitched. Her lips parted, dry and cracked. A moment later, her eyes opened, glassy and confused. She blinked against the fluorescent lights above her bed. The nurse called for the doctor. Mark was in the hallway, dozing in a plastic chair, Diesel at his feet. "Officer Holloway," the nurse called out breathlessly. "She's awake." Mark bolted upright. He rushed inside. The girl flinched when he entered. Hey, it's okay," he said gently, holding up both hands, voice soft. "You're safe." "Nobody's going to hurt you. My name's Mark. I'm a police officer." She stared at him for a long second. Her lower lip trembled. Then, almost like a switch flipped, she burst into sobs. Deep, shaking, terrified sobs that seemed to come from a place far older than her years. Mark crouched beside the bed. "You're okay now," he whispered. "You're safe." The girl didn't speak much at first. It took coaxing, patience, and time. But eventually, between hiccup breaths and trembling fingers gripping her stuffed elephant, she said her name. Lila, just 5 years old. And then she said something that made the entire room go still. "There was a bad man," she whispered. Mark leaned closer. "What bad man, sweetie?" She shook her head violently. "He said don't talk. He said he'd make the dog go away." Mark's blood froze. "What dog?" She looked up at him, eyes wide and wet. "Big black dog, not mine." He barked and barked, but the man locked him out. Diesel suddenly stood up, ears twitching. It was him. It had to be. Diesel had heard something at that cabin days ago, smelled it, known it, and now it made sense. He wasn't just barking at the river that day. He was barking because he knew she was in trouble long before anyone else did. That night, Mark returned to the cabin with backup. Diesel led the way. Mark's flashlight cut through the darkness as the team entered the cabin again. He scanned the corners, the sleeping bags, the empty beer cans. All the same, but different now. Knowing what Lila had said added a new layer of horror. Diesel padded forward. Then he stopped, his nose pressed to the floorboards near the back wall. He started whining. Then he pawed at the floor. Mark knelt down. "What is it, boy?" Diesel's nails scratched at a specific patch of floor. The wood was old, warped. Then Mark noticed something. Scrapes along the edge, as if the boards had been pried up and shut again. Mark and another officer wedged a crowbar into the seam. The floor creaked, groaned, then lifted. A trapdoor. The stench hit them immediately. Stale air, mold, something wrong. Mark aimed his flashlight into the dark hole below. It was a crawl space, shallow, maybe 4 feet deep, lined with dirt and old insulation. But in the middle of it was a pile of children's clothes. Tiny socks, pajama bottoms, shirts with cartoon characters on them. And beside them, a second stuffed animal, a different one, and a torn photograph, burned along the edges, barely visible, but showing 2 children. 2. Mark's stomach twisted. This wasn't a place someone had lived. It was a place someone had hidden things. And now, with every second, it felt more and more like Lila had escaped something terrible, and someone had wanted her to disappear forever. They sealed off the cabin that night. A full investigation was launched. Forensics teams, missing persons experts, even state detectives were called in. But for Mark, one thing was already certain. Diesel hadn't just saved a drowning girl. He had uncovered something far more sinister. A secret buried beneath a quiet town, hidden under floorboards, and almost lost to the river forever. And this was only the beginning. The news spread fast through the small town. A little girl pulled from the river by a police dog. Barely alive, no ID, no shoes. Claimed she'd been hiding in a cabin with a strange man. Local papers splashed it across front pages. Online forums buzzed with speculation. Some were calling Diesel a hero. Others were demanding answers. Who was the man Lila talked about? What was that cabin? And why had no one reported a missing child? But for Officer Mark Holloway, there was no time for theories or applause. He wanted answers, real ones, and he wanted them fast. Back at the station, Lila was being cared for by social services. A pediatric trauma counselor sat with her daily, helping her process what she'd been through. But she was still guarded. She didn't talk much. The only one she seemed to trust completely was Diesel. Whenever Mark brought Diesel into the room, her eyes lit up just a little. She'd reach out to touch his thick fur. Sometimes she even whispered to him, words no one else could hear. Mark paid attention. He kept notes. One evening, while Lila stroked Diesel's ear, she muttered a word, "Pines." Mark frowned. "What did you say, sweetheart?" She paused, then shook her head. But Mark didn't forget it. That night, Mark pulled out a map of the surrounding area. The trail where they'd been patrolling ran along the north bank of the river, but south of it, less frequented, was a stretch of thick, older forest. People called it the Pine Woods. It was isolated, dense, easy to get lost in, and it was just far enough from the cabin they'd found Lila in to be suspicious. The next morning, Mark went back out with Diesel. They followed a gravel service road that led into the deeper woods. No houses out here, no cabins, just timber, thickets, and miles of quiet. At first, Diesel just sniffed around, tail wagging gently. Then, 20 minutes in, he stopped, rigid, ears up, nose twitching fast. "What is it, boy?" Mark asked, hand on his holster. Diesel looked to the right. then bolted off the path into the brush. "Diesel," Mark called, following close behind, dodging low branches, his boots crunching under dead leaves and pine needles. They reached a clearing, and there it was, another cabin, much older, not like the first one. This one was dilapidated, half sunken into the earth on one side, windows boarded up, door crooked on its hinges, and outside the front steps, an old swing, still swaying. Mark's instinct screamed at him. Diesel growled. They circled the cabin slowly. Diesel sniffed around the perimeter. No sounds, no movement. Then Mark noticed something at the base of a tree nearby. Drag marks, deep grooves in the dirt. Not animal, boot prints. He radioed for backup. "I'm at coordinates 47.633, minus 122.231. Found another cabin, possibly connected to the case. Requesting a team. Copy that, Officer Holloway. Units en route." He didn't go inside, not yet, but the moment he looked through the cracked window, he knew something wasn't right. Inside the cabin was a table, covered in maps, newspaper clippings, dozens of photographs of children, some circled in red marker, and in the center of the table was a photo of Lila. Mark stepped back from the window, heart pounding. He stared into the trees around him. Were they being watched? He pulled Diesel closer, hand resting on his sidearm, scanning the woods. Backup arrived 10 minutes later, guns drawn. The team entered the cabin. They swept the rooms, but no one was inside. Still, what they found chilled them. There was a back room, locked from the outside. When they pried it open, they found what looked like a makeshift holding cell. Chains bolted into the concrete floor. A mattress on the ground, stained, torn. Next to it, 3 stuffed animals. One of them matched the other toy Lila had been found clutching. She had been here, but she wasn't the only one. The forensics team came in that afternoon. Mark stayed to oversee the operation. Diesel wouldn't leave his side. As dusk fell, an officer called out, "Sir, we found something in the woods behind the cabin." Mark followed them 50 yards into the trees. There, beneath a fallen pine, half covered in branches and moss, they found bones, small bones, children's bones, and nearby, an old rusted chain. The team fell silent. Diesel whined quietly and sat down, ears flat, eyes on the ground. Mark knelt beside him, placing a hand on his fur. "How long's this been going on?" he whispered to himself. They didn't know yet who the remains belonged to, but one thing was clear now. This wasn't just about a little girl who'd gone missing. This was about someone who'd been operating in the shadows, quietly, methodically, using the woods as cover, hiding children, disposing of them, and no one had noticed until Diesel. The forest was growing darker now, the last rays of sunlight slipping through the tall pines, like thin fingers reaching for the earth. Mark stood beside the fallen pine where the small bones lay, the cold weight of the reality pressing on him heavier than the night air. Diesel sat quietly next to him, his sharp eyes fixed on the spot where the bones had been uncovered. "Chief, you need to see this," one of the officers called over his radio. Mark wiped his hands on his pants and followed the voice back to the cabin. Inside, the forensics team was meticulously examining the maps and photos on the table. Dozens of missing children cases were pinned up, some from recent years, others decades old. Mark's fingers trembled as he reached out and touched one photo, an old, grainy black and white image of a girl about Lila's age. "Who's this?" he asked. "Emily Parsons," the forensic specialist replied softly. "She disappeared 27 years ago, last seen near these woods." Mark's mind raced. Could the man in the cabin have been active all this time? Was he responsible for more than just Lila's disappearance? A low bark from Diesel broke the silence. The dog was standing, sniffing near the doorway. Mark followed Diesel's gaze outside. The wind had picked up, carrying an eerie chill through the pine needles. Suddenly, Diesel bolted out the door, sprinting toward a narrow trail leading deeper into the forest. "Diesel, wait!" Mark called, but the dog was already gone. Without hesitation, Mark sprinted after him, dodging low branches and scrambling over roots. The trail was faint and winding, but Diesel ran with purpose. After several minutes, they reached a clearing where the underbrush was trampled down, like someone had been camping here recently. Mark's heart pounded. There, half buried under leaves, was a small, leather-bound notebook. Mark picked it up carefully. The cover was worn, but inside were pages filled with handwritten notes, dates, names, locations. One name stood out, Lila Jensen, and next to it, a chilling note. "She knows too much." Mark swallowed hard. This was no ordinary kidnapper. This was a man obsessed. Back at the station, Mark spread the notebook on his desk, flipping through the pages, with growing dread. Each entry was a fragmented story, accounts of children seen near the woods, notes about patrol schedules, even sketches of Diesel and Mark himself. Someone had been watching them for a long time. Mark stared at the page with Lila's name again. She knows too much. What had she seen? What had she said to this man? And most importantly, what was she hiding? That night, Mark sat in his living room, Diesel lying quietly at his feet. The dog's ears perked up at every creak, every shadow. Mark's phone buzzed. It was a message from the social worker handling Lila's case. "She's talking," the message read, "but only when Diesel's with her." Mark's heart leapt. Could Diesel be the key to unlocking her memories? The next day, Mark visited the shelter where Lila was staying. The moment Diesel walked in, Lila's face lit up, a fragile smile breaking through the fear. "She's ready," the counselor said softly. Mark sat beside Lila, Diesel close enough to lick her hand. "Lila," Mark began gently, "can you tell me what happened? Who took you?" Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "It was the man in the woods," she whispered. "He chained me up, just like the others, but Diesel saved me." Mark squeezed her hand, fighting back his own tears. "Can you tell me where the other children are?" he asked. Lila hesitated, then whispered one word: "The caves." Mark knew the pine woods well. There were old mining caves deep in the forest, abandoned for decades. He and Diesel geared up and headed out again. The sun was high when they reached the entrance, dark and gaping like a mouth waiting to swallow them whole. Mark's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing jagged rocks and discarded remnants of old tools. Deeper inside, they found markings, scratches on the walls, and small bundles of cloth. Mark's heart sank. They weren't alone. Then, from the shadows, came a faint sound, a soft whimpering. Diesel growled low, moving forward. Mark called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The cave seemed to swallow his voice. And then, just ahead, he spotted movement. A small figure curled in a corner. A child. Mark's breath caught as he edged closer to the small figure, huddled in the dark corner of the cave. The faint whimpering grew louder as Diesel inched forward, his body low and tense, protective yet ready to defend. "Hey, it's okay. We're here to help," Mark whispered, shining his flashlight steadily. The child looked up, eyes wide with fear, but flickering with a hint of hope. Mark could barely make out the dirt-smudged face and tangled hair. She was small, no more than 7 or 8. "Lila," Mark asked gently. The child nodded, clutching a ragged blanket close. "Are you alone?" Mark's voice softened. She shook her head. Mark scanned the shadowy cave walls with his light. Deeper inside, he spotted more faint outlines, bundles, blankets, signs someone else had been here recently. His heart hammered. This was bigger than he imagined. Suddenly, Diesel growled sharply, ears pricked. Mark followed the dog's gaze. From a narrow passage to the side, a man's silhouette loomed, a dark figure that froze for a moment before disappearing deeper into the cave. Mark cursed under his breath. The kidnapper was still here. "Stay close," Mark murmured to Lila, pulling her gently up. Diesel pressed close, alert and watchful. Together, they navigated back toward the cave entrance, but the narrow passageways twisted and turned, confusing Mark's sense of direction. A sudden sound, a sharp crack, echoed behind them. Mark spun around just in time to see a large rock slide down, partially blocking the path they'd just taken. He realized the kidnapper was trying to trap them. "Come on," Mark urged, his voice tense. They scrambled through a narrow opening leading to a different tunnel, heart pounding with every step. At last, they burst out into the fading daylight. Mark shielded Lila's eyes, breathing in the fresh air. Behind them, Diesel barked loudly, as if warning the kidnapper not to follow. Mark held Lila close. "You're safe now," he promised. But even as relief flooded his chest, Mark knew this was just the beginning. The caves might have hidden one child, but how many others were still trapped in the shadows? Back at the station, Mark laid out the evidence and notes from the cave. The investigation suddenly took on a new urgency. With Lila's help, they mapped out other possible hideouts, all tied to the eerie notebook. As days passed, the search expanded. Diesel led the team through dense woods, across rivers, and into abandoned cabins, where faint signs of life lingered. Mark saw the incredible bond between the dog and the survivors, how Diesel's presence gave them courage. One evening, as Mark watched Diesel resting by the fire, he thought about the many lives still at risk. This dog saved more than just one child, Mark said quietly to himself. He saved hope. The days that followed were some of the longest Mark Holloway had ever experienced. Every morning, he woke with a single thought. Where were the others? How many more children could be trapped somewhere in the shadows, counting on someone, anyone, to find them? Diesel was more than a partner now. He was a symbol of hope, a beacon guiding them through the darkest places no one wanted to see. Mark's team worked tirelessly, using every scrap of information they could gather, from Lila's shaky descriptions to the cryptic notes found in the cave. They searched abandoned buildings, dense forests, and forgotten tunnels that stretched beneath the town like veins of silence. Each new location brought its own challenges. Sometimes, the team found nothing but dust and echoes. Other times, they discovered signs, small toys, scraps of clothing, or faint markings on walls, proof that they were getting closer. One afternoon, Diesel suddenly froze during a sweep near an old warehouse on the edge of town. His hackles rose, and he let out a low growl that sent a chill down Mark's spine. "Diesel, what is it?" Mark whispered, scanning the area. The dog moved cautiously toward a broken window. Mark followed, heart pounding. Inside, scattered on the floor, were more belongings, worn shoes, a cracked doll, a torn book. Mark's stomach tightened. It was clear someone had been here recently. He knelt, gently picking up the book. Inside, the pages were filled with childish scribbles and drawings, pictures of dogs, houses, and strange symbols that matched the notebook found in the cave. This wasn't just a random hideout. It was part of a network. Mark looked at Diesel, who seemed to understand the weight of the discovery. "We're onto something big, boy," Mark said softly. The night air was heavy as the team set up a perimeter around the warehouse. Flashlights cut through the darkness, and radios crackled with quiet urgency. Mark sat beside Diesel, feeling the dog's steady warmth and silent confidence. "Tomorrow, we'll find answers," Mark promised. But as the hours ticked by, a creeping sense of unease settled over the group. It was more than just the danger of the unknown. It was the feeling that time was running out. They had already saved one child, but there were still others, still trapped. And somewhere, the kidnapper was watching, waiting. The following day brought a breakthrough. Lila, now safe and slowly recovering, had begun to remember more details about her captivity. Small clues, whispered secrets, and the way the kidnapper moved silently like a shadow. Mark listened carefully, piecing together the puzzle. "It's like he knew the woods better than anyone," Lila said softly, like he was always one step ahead. Mark nodded grimly. That knowledge made the hunt even more dangerous, but Diesel's instincts never wavered. Time and again, the dog led the team to hidden trails, narrow caves, and secret clearings where faint signs of life lingered. Each discovery brought hope and dread, because the kidnapper's reach was vast, and every moment they hesitated, someone else could disappear. As Mark stood on the edge of a forest clearing one evening, watching Diesel sniff the ground, he realized just how much this dog had changed everything. Diesel wasn't just a K9 unit anymore. He was a lifeline, a hero, and Mark knew they had to keep pushing, no matter the cost, because somewhere out there, in the darkness, more lives depended on it. The next morning dawned cold and gray. Mist clung to the riverbanks, and the forest seemed quieter than usual. Mark Holloway and his team gathered near the edge of the woods, preparing to follow the faint trail Diesel had uncovered the day before. Diesel's nose twitched as he sniffed the damp air, moving steadily forward. Mark stayed close, watching the dog's every move. He trusted Diesel's instincts more than anything, knowing that the dog's keen senses could detect what the human eye could not. As they ventured deeper, the trees grew thicker and the path narrower. The sounds of birds and rustling leaves faded away, replaced by an eerie silence. The team's footsteps were muffled by moss and fallen leaves, and each breath seemed louder than the last. Suddenly, Diesel stopped, ears pricked. He glanced back at Mark, then darted forward again with renewed urgency. Mark's heart pounded. This wasn't just a search anymore. It was a race against time. After a few minutes, Diesel led them to a small clearing. In the center stood an old, abandoned cabin, hidden beneath vines and overgrowth. The windows were broken, and the door hung crooked on its hinges. Mark approached cautiously, signaling the team to spread out. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood, and something else, something faint but unmistakably human. "Could be a hideout," Mark whispered. He motioned for Diesel to stay close. As he pushed the door open, the cabin creaked loudly, and dust floated in the shafts of light. Inside, the room was sparse: an overturned chair, a cracked mirror, and a few scattered items on the floor. But then Mark spotted it, a small backpack, partially hidden beneath a tattered blanket. He knelt down and unzipped it carefully. Inside were clothes, child-sized, worn and dirty, and a notebook, its pages filled with shaky handwriting. Mark's eyes scanned the words, trying to make sense of the scattered thoughts and drawings. It was clear the child who had written it had been here for a while, documenting their days in the cabin. Outside, Diesel began to bark sharply. Mark rushed to the window and saw the dog fixated on something in the nearby bushes. "Hold on," Mark said, moving toward the door. He stepped outside just as Diesel charged through the underbrush. The dog stopped abruptly, nose down, then barked again. Mark followed and found Diesel pawing at a shallow hole in the ground. As Mark helped clear the dirt, his fingers brushed against something hard, a small box, locked but worn. With some effort, Mark pried it open. Inside were photographs and letters, some folded and yellowed with age. They told a story of a family torn apart, secrets hidden beneath layers of silence, and buried beneath the pain was the chilling hint of why the kidnappings had begun. Mark sat back, the weight of the discovery pressing down on him. This wasn't just about one missing child, it was about something deeper, something that had festered in the town's shadows for years, and Diesel had just led them to the heart of it. The team knew they were getting closer to the truth, but with every new piece of the puzzle, the danger grew. The kidnapper wasn't just hiding, he was watching, waiting, and Mark understood that the next steps would be the most dangerous yet, because the clock was ticking, and more lives were on the line. The sun was sinking low, casting long shadows across the dense forest as Mark and his team gathered around the cabin. The unease in the air was palpable. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed amplified. Mark's mind raced. The photos and letters had revealed more than just a family tragedy. They hinted at a hidden network, something far more sinister. A string of disappearances that stretched back years, all connected by faint threads only someone like Diesel could detect. Diesel sat quietly beside Mark, ears alert. The dog had seemed drained after yesterday's rescue, but was already showing signs of impatience, eager to move forward. "We need to follow the trail again. Check for anything we might have missed," Mark said. His voice was steady, but inside, the weight of responsibility pressed hard. The team divided into pairs, each scanning the area carefully. The locals who had gathered earlier looked on, some whispering rumors they'd heard, others sharing fragmented memories of missing children and strange sightings near the river. Mark overheard one elderly man muttering, "They say the river's cursed, something evil lurks beneath." Mark shook his head, pushing superstition aside. He had facts, evidence, and Diesel. As night settled, the forest took on an even more ominous tone. The trail led them closer to the river's edge, where the water lapped quietly against the stones. Suddenly, Diesel froze, nose twitching violently. Mark caught his breath. The dog began to bark again, a sharp, urgent sound that echoed through the trees. "Easy, boy," Mark murmured, stepping forward. Diesel moved ahead, pawing at the muddy bank. Mark spotted something half buried in the dirt, a small, worn shoe. His heart sank. It was the same size as the clothes they'd found in the cabin. The shoe was muddy and torn, as if the owner had struggled to get away. Mark called the team back together. "This confirms what we feared," he said quietly. "The child was here, and whatever happened, it wasn't quick." The realization hit them all hard. Then, just as Mark was about to call for backup, Diesel began pulling on his leash, desperate to move forward. Mark hesitated but followed. Deeper into the thicket, the dog stopped at a small, hidden entrance, almost invisible beneath leaves and vines. A narrow tunnel led underground. Mark shone his flashlight inside, revealing damp earth walls. "This looks fresh," one of the officers said, voice low. Mark's pulse quickened. They had found the hiding place, but what awaited them below was still unknown. Mark signaled the team to get ready. They prepared ropes, flashlights, and equipment. Diesel growled softly, as if warning them to be careful. With a deep breath, Mark led the way into the darkness. The tunnel was tight and cold, the air thick with the scent of earth and something faintly metallic. As they moved forward, distant sounds reached their ears, a faint whimpering. Mark's heart pounded. They were close, and the next moments could change everything. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, winding beneath the forest floor like a secret thread no one was meant to follow. Mark's flashlight cut through the thick darkness, flickering slightly as dust stirred with every cautious step. Diesel stayed close, his body tense but alert, ears pricked forward, sniffing the stale air. The faint whimpering grew louder, soft, desperate, filled with fear. Mark's chest tightened. He knew what they were about to find. Around a bend, the tunnel opened into a small underground chamber, barely large enough to stand in. The damp walls glistened, and faint traces of old markings were etched into the stone, scratches from long ago, or maybe recent. And in the far corner, curled up on the cold ground, was a small figure. Mark's breath caught in his throat. A child, no older than 7 or 8, trembling and dirty, eyes wide with shock and confusion. Diesel immediately moved closer, nuzzling the child gently, offering warmth and comfort. The child reached out, grasping the dog's fur weakly, as if recognizing a protector. Mark stepped forward slowly, trying not to startle the boy. "It's okay," Mark said softly. "You're safe now." The team moved quickly to secure the area and called for medical help. As the child was gently lifted out of the tunnel and into the fresh air, the crowd that had gathered at the entrance gasped in relief and disbelief. For days, the boy had been trapped in that hidden chamber, forgotten and alone, yet somehow alive. Mark looked at Diesel with deep gratitude. The dog had not only found the boy, but had refused to give up, pushing through fear and exhaustion. Back at the station, the boy was wrapped in warm blankets, his story beginning to unfold. He spoke quietly, revealing a tale of abduction, fear, and hope, the very reasons Diesel's instincts had been so sharp. The investigation that followed uncovered a web of secrets, people who wanted the truth hidden, but the dog's actions had shattered their plans. Diesel wasn't just a partner, he was a lifeline. Mark realized then what he always knew deep down. Sometimes, a dog's courage can be the difference between life and death. The mystery wasn't just solved by a man or a team, it was solved by a dog's heart. And that's why this story isn't just about a rescue. It's about hope, trust, and the powerful bond between humans and their best friends. The moment Diesel dragged the small, trembling body from the water was the moment time seemed to stop. Everyone around gasped, their faces pale and frozen in disbelief. The boy's soaked clothes clung to him, his lips blue from the cold, and his breaths came in shallow gasps. Mark dropped to his knees beside him, instantly checking for signs of life. "Stay with me, kid," Mark whispered, panic rising. Diesel sat nearby, his eyes locked on the boy, as if willing him to hold on. The local paramedics arrived just in time, rushing to the scene with blankets and oxygen. But the real battle had just begun. As they worked on the boy, Mark's mind raced. How had this happened? Who left him here? And most importantly, would he survive? Diesel's barking turned from urgent to soft whines, sensing the fragile line between life and death. Minutes felt like hours. Then slowly, the boy's eyes fluttered open. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the crowd. Tears streamed down Mark's face as he looked at Diesel, the dog who refused to leave the boy alone, who risked everything to save a life no one else even knew was in danger. This was more than a rescue. It was a miracle. The investigation that followed uncovered a chilling truth. The boy had been kidnapped and hidden by someone desperate to keep him out of sight. Without Diesel's instincts and relentless courage, this child might never have been found. The dog wasn't just a partner in law enforcement. He was a true hero. Mark often says, Diesel saved more than a life that day. He saved hope. And this story reminds us all of the incredible bond between humans and dogs, and the extraordinary things they can achieve together. That day by the river wasn't just another routine patrol for Officer Mark Holloway and his K-9 partner, Diesel. It became a moment that changed lives forever. Diesel's sharp instincts, courage, and unwavering loyalty pulled a young boy from the brink of death. What started as a quiet afternoon turned into a rescue mission that no one expected. This story reminds us how much our furry friends understand and how deeply they care, often risking their own safety for ours. Diesel's actions went beyond training. It was his heart, his dedication, and his bond with Mark that made all the difference. Every day, countless dogs like Diesel silently protect, guide, and save lives. And sometimes their heroic deeds remain unseen until moments like this. Remember, the next time you see a dog on patrol, know that you're witnessing a true hero in action. If this story moved you, subscribe for more incredible animal stories.